I'm here with Darcey Cobbs-Lomax, who is the Executive Director of the Office of Health Equity and Community Impact for Yale New Haven Health, and a member of the Carol Emmett Foundation's Collaborative. And that's where I first heard Darcey tell her story of focusing attention at Yale on health access and community impact. We pull Darcey in every year to tell her story to the Carol Emmett Fellows. She's also been a fellow of the Connecticut Health Foundation, has shared her expertise with several universities in Connecticut, and has been a leader at Yale New Haven Health for 13 years. Welcome to the Treasure Hunt, Darcey.
Great. Thank you for having me. Excited to be.
Your professional history, as I've heard a number of times, has been shaped by a determination to make healthcare fair for everyone. Share with us a little bit about the experiences that helped develop that determination.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think I can point to any one experience or event that happened in my life. But as a Black woman who was born in the early 70s, just kind of coming out of the civil rights era, if you will, in the country, my youth and childhood was shaped by the impressions that my parents and grandparents had and experienced in this country. So while I did not go to segregated schools, my father did for a period of his life, and my grandparents absolutely did. So I had a perspective on what access meant globally, right? So not just access to healthcare, but access to education, access to spaces, access to the communities we lived in or could not live in was shared with me throughout my childhood. So I knew that I was of a generation that was overcoming some pretty big hurdles. And while I never felt I had the weight of any world on my shoulders, I felt like there was an expectation that I would do something unique with the opportunities that were in front of me because my parents didn't have those same opportunities, and absolutely not my grandparents who, were born in this country under Jim Crow law in Southwest Georgia. So education was really stressed a lot in my childhood, and I went to college in the Southeast and graduate school. But I can name a particular place that I worked that helped me think about I want to learn the business of healthcare. And my very first job post-graduate school after I'd gotten an MBA, I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I took a job with a clinic in the South Bronx in New York. And I would go to this clinic every day. And truthfully, I was working as an interpreter. I was a French major as an undergrad, and I had a 1-year contract at a WIC program. And I would observe what appeared to be, in my opinion, extreme inefficiency with how the clinic was run. I saw many patients who didn't speak English sit and wait for hours to be seen. And I just thought this can't possibly be healthcare in America. I watched, children would be there crying, they'd be having lunch, they'd be leaving and coming back and still not seen. It was really just a puzzling experience for me. And I decided from that I wanted to learn the business of healthcare. So that probably, matched alongside my experiences of growing up, in the 70s and 80s. My paternal grandmother once shared that she had never seen a doctor in America until she was about to give birth to my father in Connecticut. She was born in rural Georgia where there were no doctors for Black people. So, kind of all of those experiences came together, and I thought, this is somewhere where I could do something meaningful in life. And things sort of took off from that experience working in the Bronx.
Well, it sounds like your awareness of this history gave you a real sense of obligation to build on that, not to take it for granted. Is that what you experienced?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, it's funny, I just told my son this over the weekend. I said, education is something no one can take from you. And when I was a child, my family members would tell me this, and I didn't really understand it. I thought, you can forget things, but the ability or the opportunity to educate yourself and be a lifelong learner, whether formally or informally, was not something that my family members had. So I realized today as an adult woman that a lot of what they shared was because of a lack of having access or opportunity. We'll talk a little bit, I think, about some other things that I do to continue being a lifelong learner, but the things that I could learn in school and then apply to the world really mattered. And that was sort of instilled in me in an indirect way without anyone ever saying, go out and do great work in the world, Darcey, that's meaningful. It certainly started at home with my parents and grandparents kind of supporting me and nudging me in their own way in that direction.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Of course, growing up as a white guy in America, Orange County, California, I had no, I think I was definitely one of those people who took it all for granted. When my parents would tell me stuff about the importance of education, I was like, yeah, but I knew it was essential. It was like taken for granted. But it kind of underlies something my mother always said, you've been given a lot, you owe a lot. And similar kind of thing. She was trying to tell me, we didn't get here automatically. It's not a given. And certainly for a Black woman, I think that's very clearly so. Well, I still remember hearing you talk at the Collaborative, several years ago now, and just was so taken with, the story of what you had done in terms of building this work at Yale New Haven to increase real fairness in healthcare delivery access, building on a lot of other things that you've done. And that's led us, of course, to say, this is such a great story. I want to make sure that, at least a few classes of our Carol Emmott Fellows get a chance to hear you. And was so pleased you came back again this year. And thanks. That you got, rave reviews for what you had to share about that. So I'd like to hear about where you are now with this, what you've created at Yale New Haven, and a little bit about what it took to create it, to create the initiative that you're leading at the health system.
Sure. So as you shared, my title is Executive Director for the Office of Health Equity and Community Impact for Yale New Haven Health System. So I lead our health equity strategy and implementation efforts in the quality and safety space, along with the medical director and our chief quality officer, and also oversee our community health needs assessment work and what equity shows up and looks like in the communities where our 5 hospitals are. If someone had said to me when I was a kid growing up in Bridgeport, Connecticut, that one day you'll be a health equity leader or you'll work in healthcare, my brain would have gone to, well, will I be a doctor or a nurse? And I didn't really love the sciences as a child. So I could have never imagined this for myself today. But it's work that I really get a tremendous amount of joy out of doing. Now, that being said, I'll tell the truth. It's hard, right? So the way that this work came to be was I was asked what I often say is the question of a lifetime. And a leader in our health system asked a group of us, what's your pie in the sky dream for our health system? And my response was that we would make every decision from an equity lens, right down to who we buy our Band-Aids from. And as you know, Doug, I've shared the story that nobody responded to that. Like nobody thought that was a great idea. And this was in the summer of 2020. So remember, we're, in the middle of the pandemic, of the COVID-19 pandemic. And so that idea sort of sat with me. I remember where I was the day it kind of floated across my brain in my house that, you should really push to work on this. And I took it back to that same leader who said, yeah, tell me what you got. What can you put together? And I put together a proposal. He gave some feedback and we took it to our chief clinical officer, who poked a lot of holes in it and said, if you really want to do this, you'll come back with these questions answered. And I did. And from there, he helped me form a steering committee. We did a lot of foundational work, but I was a one-woman show for about 9 months, and then proposed to our executives that we should have an Office of Health Equity, and they said yes, and they let me start it, and they gave me a few dollars to hire some staff. So there's a lot more details to it than that. But what I would say is that relationships really matter in this work. I got to know a lot of new people in the hospital, people I didn't know, but I knew enough, along the way to kind of, get my foot in the door. I think, I had an idea and I thought, well, what do I have to lose? The worst they could say is no. And I have historically not been a risk taker in my career. I've been kind of a safe sort of, I know I can do this job. I know I've got I can check all the boxes. Well, here's a job that had no job description, right? I created it myself. I used, friends and colleagues and information from other health systems who certainly were already doing this work and helped me sort of put the blueprint together. But what I often remind myself is that startups are hard, right? And this is a startup. We're 5 years in, or almost 5 years in, but it's still, a startup, and lots has changed in America since 2020. But I would say, when I look back over the 5 years, that I'm glad I spoke up that day, because I could have taken the usual Darcey approach of, well, I could have just said the norm, and I don't know what the norm would have been, but what really was in my head and in my heart that day was to mention equity and health equity. And as a result, I get to come to work every day, sometimes from home, sometimes in the office, and I get to do things that I really love and bring me a lot of joy.
And I love that story, and obviously, because I've promoted it quite a lot. But I promote it because I think very often we prevent ourselves from taking these risks. And you went against the grain, as you say. I'm not a risk taker generally, but you cared about something enough to do it. And then you put the energy, the individual, initiative and stick to it to make that work, but didn't try to do it all by yourself. The story shows that you gathered people, you connected, you had conversations with people.
Sure.
It's a powerful illustration of what an individual can do when she's focused on that. So thanks so much for sharing that. I know you're a hard worker, but I heard some years ago that you had an insight into yourself. I don't know if you remember what you said about that, but about what makes you happy and how that insight about what makes you happy changed to some extent the focus of your own efforts.
Sure. So I'm a wife and a mom of 4 children that I've given birth to. I have a bonus daughter also. And we have a dog. We have a dog, Ruby. And we often hear a lot about work-life balance, and I think it's different for women, right? I think it's different for women for a number of reasons, because we get pregnant, we give birth to the children, we are natural caregivers, and not that husbands aren't. My husband is a very hands-on father with our children, and has been extraordinarily supportive of me and my career. But I felt like I always wanted to make sure I could be present for my children, and something that I don't remember when I first thought this thought, but I've shared it with a lot of people. It's that I get one chance to raise my children. I get one shot at this, right? There's no do-overs. It's not a dress rehearsal. I get one chance to show up for their, dance recitals or their PTO meetings or the school play. And I really wanted to be and want to continue to be present for them in those spaces and in those ways. And, in the whole scheme of how long we work in America, if you work to a retirement age of 67 or whatever, maybe it's going to be 70 soon, I'll be 80, who knows, right? But if you work a body of 40 years or so, that's a lot of time to do a lot of different things. And that's what I had to remind myself. So when I think of, maybe where some friends or colleagues are who I went to business school with, who really had a clear trajectory of, I want to be the CFO of, a Fortune 500 company. And those were not things that were in my brain when I finished business school. I decided it was okay. And as a result, I feel like I don't always get it right. Yesterday, my daughter didn't have school and I sent her to the bus stop, right? So I missed things, right? She came back home. But I feel good about how I've been able to balance and navigate the time that I really want to pour into my children while they're young, alongside, I'm going to have a career and kind of develop and build things at my own pace. So that's one insight that comes to mind that I feel good about. And as I don't always get it right, like I said, my daughter, I sent her to school, but there was no school yesterday. So, we have those sort of hiccups. We laugh about them, but I've tried really hard to balance the two.
So how does that conviction actually affect your day-to-day decisions?
Well, I'm very intentional about how I use my time at work. So I've availed myself to many tools and trainings that Yale New Haven has about just how to organize your day, right? Like there's lots of leadership training and things I can do, but I recently took a class called Getting Things Done that has really helped me just figure out how do I use the 8 hours in my day well. So I'm very intentional about, the time my day starts, the time my day ends. It doesn't mean that I don't do work in the evening sometimes, but I'm really disciplined about when I read email, what I do at the dinner table or don't do at the dinner table, where my phone is. because there's just some sacred time that we have as a family. My husband works overnight, so dinner is really special for us because it's the one time in the day where everybody is sort of on the same sleep schedule. So we're around the table together. We really try to talk about our days, the highs, the lows, etc. So for that 30, 45 minutes or an hour, I try to be very, very present. And there is work that bleeds into the evening sometimes, or even the early mornings. But I try to make sure I can really carve out moments, like this morning, just walking to the bus stop with my daughter and our dog, right on the right day to go to school. She had school today. Um, you know, just those moments. I don't want to miss them because just hearing what's in her head or her heart as a 10-year-old and watching her skip down the street, with not a care in the world. That reminds me to find the joy in the surroundings as I'm walking back home to get my day started.
Yeah. Does it change though? Because some of them are older.
Correct.
And so as they become more independent, how does that affect the kind of choices you make?
It does. So my oldest son is 24. He's an engineer. He's out interviewing for a new job. He went to a job interview this morning, right? He's in a suit and tie. He drives. He's on his own. I have a 17-year-old who's a senior in high school who's getting ready to leave our home to go to college in North Carolina. I have a daughter in boarding school that I never saw coming, but she's off in Massachusetts in boarding school. So, my teenagers and my young adult child, it's a different kind of time that I want to be able to spend with them. I do have that mom instinct to want to like hold on, for everything or be present maybe a little more in their lives sometimes than they would like. But I enjoy seeing who they're becoming. They're so different. None of them leaning towards healthcare at this time. And it's just a joy to watch them kind of navigate the world in a very different world than I navigated as a high school student. There was no internet. The phone was on the wall in the kitchen with a long cord you stretched around the house. We watched TV around one television. It seems like my husband and I are the only two that watch the big flat screen that we just bought. But it's a little bittersweet, I would say. But still, as I watch them, just becoming really great young adults with opinions of their own, it makes me feel like I think we got a few things right.
That's so excellent. That's excellent. You mentioned the pandemic, and I saw that in the early days, actually, which we didn't know were the early days of the pandemic, in kind of the middle of 2020, I saw that National Geographic featured you and your sister, and you lost your father, Morgan, and your grandmother, Evelyn, as a part of that pandemic within a week of each other, I think that you said. How did that affect your professional life and your own kind of healthcare leadership role?
Yeah. So as you mentioned, my father and grandmother both died during the pandemic, and both died from COVID at Yale New Haven Hospital, where I work. It was actually 5 years and 2 days ago today that my grandmother died, and
Oh, wow.
on the 27th of this month will be the 5-year anniversary of my father's death. Um, it's interesting because, as an adult, there's things you do that as an adult, like you get out of college. If you go to college, you maybe purchase a home, your first car, maybe build a house. But having to bury my father made me feel like an adult. I don't know how to explain it other than that. It felt like, it's sort of one of those life seasons that it's not if it happens, it's when it happens. And even in the best of circumstances, when all of the end of life plans are laid out far in advance, as was the case for my grandmother, it is still extraordinarily hard. It was hard because it was the pandemic. I couldn't see them. It was the early days of the pandemic. My grandmother was 95 years old. She had just moved in with my father. He was her caregiver. My dad, in my opinion, was a healthy 73-year-old man who had just vacationed with me in Georgia, not long prior to that, and had a vacation planned that summer to the Caribbean. So the loss was sudden, and certainly not a way that I'd ever imagined. We couldn't bury them. The world was closed essentially. So we had a memorial for them that fall in October of 2020, but still we were social distancing. So only 26 people could be present for their memorial service. I think one of the things it did was it made me really stop and think about, what do I need as an individual? I'd been someone who's worked hard. It taught me to ask for what I need. And by that, I mean, and I sort of got some coaching even from my former boss, who would say, like, you don't have to work today. He's like, I'm not telling you not to work, but if he really pushed for take the time that you need. And I shared a story in his weekly newsletter that I was driving one day and I was at a stop sign by my house and I felt like I was having a heart attack. So, and I remember going through all the things I've learned, like, this isn't signs of a stroke. I don't really think I'm having a heart attack, but it really hit me with this, like, sort of like pain in my chest that, like, I need to take some time off from work. And I remember calling him to tell him, and he was, like, take the time you need. The work will still be here, right? But, we want you to be here too. I learned that therapy is okay. And I think I always knew that, but, our health system had all kinds of support for people who were managing the pandemic in different ways. So I really sought out therapy in a very intentional way for myself. I'd recommended it to team members and colleagues for years, but now I was like, I really need this help. So I think from just how am I going to show up every day, I learned to take care of myself differently and to ask for the days off that I needed, the time that I needed, to say I can't be here for this conversation. There were some things that were very triggering to me because, I've just lost, two people who are extraordinarily important in my life. And we're talking about the pandemic, at work every day. And we were talking about it sometimes from the success angle, right, of the patients who were being discharged, right, the patients who were surviving. And I wrote a letter to a very senior leader at that time and shared with this individual that, I love that we are able to care for these patients and that they're going home. But so please remember those that came in and will never walk out. And this person, called me and wrote me a really heartfelt letter and thanked me for that. And then followed up in a later communication to staff, kind of acknowledging that, not only have we lost our colleagues, but there are people here who have lost their loved ones as well. So one of the biggest things from this time 5 years ago was just really learning how to take care of myself and to advocate for what I need so that I can show up to be the best version of Darcey I can be in the workplace.
Wow. Yeah. Thank you. You also date 2020 as the year you begin sewing officially. I don't know exactly what that means, but I know you're learning. Are you still active in growing your sewing skills?
So yes and no. So what's interesting is I had a sewing space set up in we've since moved a couple years ago from our previous house. So I had a space set up in downstairs of our house where I would sew. And then when we all started working from home, that became my sewing and work from home space. So I do still sew, not as much as I would like. But what I do that's a little different is I do take time to read sewing patterns, to really I watch a lot of YouTube videos, and I'm a lot more intentional now about what I will choose to sew for myself. So I do enjoy sewing clothes for myself. I'm taller than most women. I'm about 6 feet tall. So it's nice to create, new things. It's part of my being a lifelong learner. My mother sewed when I was a child and probably still is a great sewist. And so was my maternal grandmother as well. So I grew up around that. But I have a new potential hobby. So my husband and I are considering beekeeping. And that's really kind of like something we're exploring. We just met with a beekeeper last weekend. So we're going to take the next year to see if bees are something we'd like to have on our property. And I'm intrigued by it. So I don't know for sure if we'll get there. But at a minimum, we're doing a lot of landscaping and planting of some pollinator plants to at least help the environment. But I'm really leaning towards maybe having a bee.
Excellent. Did you find that? Did you think of sewing also as part of your grief process and healing? Or, I mean, is it more than just that they were similar in dates?
Well, one, we were at home. Now, I was not new to sewing, but I was new to sewing consistently. So, I'd had a sewing machine for quite some time. But, I found myself with pockets of time because my children weren't running to any activities, right? So I'm now home to them anywhere. So I found myself with pockets of time, and I thought, I want to use this time wisely and not just to fill it in with just any old anything. And so I really enjoy sewing. I don't know which part of my brain I'm using, but kind of the mathematics, sort of geometry kind of skills that I learned in school, but also the ability to be creative, and, put things together that sometimes look great, and I have a few things that will never come out of the closet, but they're mine, and I made them, and I have a pride in being able to create things. And it just gave me a little bit of it was time where nobody bothered me, because nobody, not that my children bothered me, but nobody really would kind of come and hang around mom during that time. So it gave me time to, I think and reflect. It gave me quiet time where my hands were still kind of busy. And I think when I think back on that, I needed that, right? I needed that as opposed to just sitting and like, sitting in sorrow. I was able to kind of sit and sort of channel maybe some of that sadness into projects or just my brain into other areas. So I'm really grateful for that I had some of that skill to sort of resurrect during that time, because
Yeah,
I think without it, I might have I don't know what I would have done, but this was absolutely therapeutic in its own way.
that makes a lot of sense. Um, I know your faith and your church are important to you. I saw recently photos of you and your husband Ray at a gala celebration for your church. What was that like?
Oh, it was fabulous. So our church, we go to church in Bridgeport, Connecticut. It's called New Vision International Ministries, and it's a newer church. So it's 25 years old. We just celebrated our 25th anniversary at a gala. So it was nice. We got dressed up. My husband put on his tuxedo, which still fits, and I bought a new gown, which was nice.
You guys looked fabulous.
Thank you. And so we went out, we ate, we danced, had a nice time with members of the church, but there were 350 or so folks who came, so lots of community members as well. And my faith is very important to me. I think you've heard me say that I really believe the Office of Health Equity was a God assignment for me. I remember very clearly sitting at my sewing desk, when what I'll say, I will say, God, I believe, told me this is the work to do, because I don't think I would have had the courage without, God nudging me to say, like, hey, we should be working on equity. I don't, because even as I said it, I remember thinking, like, that's not normally me to come out with anything the innovative idea might have sat in my brain, but, really to bring those words forth, I really believe that the work that I'm doing is a God assignment. I don't know how to describe it other than that. So even days when it's really hard, and there's hard days, like I've shared with you and fellows that, I've cried in my office about, just the stress or things not going as planned. And I like to be as real as I can about that, that's a real emotion I've had, with the work. But I'm reminded to, to keep at it, right? I know there's more to be done. Even in the climate today, that's not what I had ever hoped for from, all of the changes coming out of DC. This work matters. It matters for all people, right? For everyone in this country, regardless of, race, ethnicity, preferred written or spoken language. I mean, those are the demographics that we go to a lot. But, our definition is that we want, everyone to be as healthy as possible. Like, that's what equity means for us at Yale New Haven Health. And in order to do that, we've got to keep working on it. So I'm going to continue to kind of prayerfully beat the drum of health equity, of community impact, of, the role that we play as the biggest citizen in any of our communities to do the most that we can with the resources that we have, and to build those relationships and partnerships that can make everyone as healthy as possible.
Wonderful. Darcey, thank you so much for spending this time with us, and look forward to our next conversations as well. Bye now.
Right.